back to the NPTEL online certification course Tribal Studies in India, Interdisciplinary Perspectives and Approaches. Today we are already on lecture number 41, and in this lecture we will be specifically focusing on a case study about the formation of a political party in Mizoram, that is the Mizo Union. Now, in the last few lectures we have laid out some of the broader context of these lectures, in the sense that we try to trace back the history of or the establishment of democracy in India, and how tribal communities have actually participated and articulate their political aspirations. And these articulations of political aspirations, a very important feature of this is the emergence of political parties within the communities or from within the tribal communities. And all over India we have seen that tribal communities have established or formed their own political parties in the hope that they will achieve some form of political recognition, and this form of political recognition essentially was articulated in the demands for state or statehood, a separate statehood or political autonomy. And in that line, a very important political party that was established in the northeastern part of India was the Mizo Union. Before I go into the depth of my lecture, so I just wanted to also give some preliminary remarks about why it is important to talk about this. Is that I have also mentioned this in my last lectures also, that many a times the assumption is that tribal communities, such as say in Mizoram for instance, it was administratively very isolated, because under the Government of India Act it was declared as the excluded areas. Now, in excluded areas we know that there was no representations in the provincial assemblies or the assemblies, and in that sense tribal communities were prevented from participating even in the anti-colonial movements. And there was also no sincere effort by the mainstream political parties to reach out to tribal regions and areas, because of the kind of administrative setup that was laid down by the British. So, the assumption always was that because of the kind of the nature of the communities in terms of where they live, that is geographically isolated spaces, and which only gets reinforced through the different legislations that were introduced by the British. But on the contrary, what we see is that these spaces were never quite politically, in the sense that there was a lot of political articulations, political mobilizations that was happening. And through this lecture we will try to understand what kind of political mobilization, what kind of political articulations happen in the state of today's Mizoram in the northeastern part of India. So, the Mizo Union is very important when it comes to talking about political parties in the context of Mizoram, essentially because it was the first political party that was established, and it resulted into the establishment of a democratic consciousness among the minds of the Mizo people. And till today we can see that the foundation which was laid by the Mizo Union continues to resonate in the democratic culture of the Mizos even till today. So, in the 1940s we see that all over India there was a very strong anti-colonial movements, and regions like Mizoram, which was put under excluded areas, was not entirely silent. So, there was political churning that was already happening, and a few section of people who got exposure in the First World War, in the Second World War, or who received modern education, started started aspiring or started articulating political rights, began to talk about the issue of political representation. So, in the 1940s, the political changes in the 1940s, this generated a political awakening among the Mizos in the then Lusai Hills. Lusai Hills was, today's Mizoram was known as Lusai Hills till the 1947. It was renamed as Mizo Hills in 1954, and then Mizoram in 1972, a name which it retained till today. So, I am going to use this Lusai Hills Mizoram synonymously. So, do not confuse with the term, it means the same area, the same region. So, being apprehensive about their future and their uncertain present, the Mizo intellectuals felt the need to have a political party of their own which would determine the course of their future. So, but by the 1940s, it was it began to be clear that the British were going to leave India at some point of time, sooner or later. And at that kind of juncture, communities like the Mizos began to think about what will be their political future, what will their political future look like. Now, on the one hand, we see that definitely the Indian National Congress was interested to bring all these diverse people, diverse regions together. But the British also have their own plans, in the sense that they wanted to retain some form of control over these regions, such as the Lushai Hills, the Naga Hills, Arunachal Pradesh and all, essentially because they think that these communities are not yet ready for any kind of political independence, and they are not matured enough to participate in a formal political processes. So, the kind of approach that the colonial state followed, or the attitude of the colonial state, was very, very patronizing, very, very paternalistic. So, in that kind of situation, we begin to see that the Mizos does not want someone to think for them. So, what they essentially wanted was that to think for themselves, what will be best, what will be good for the communities, not only in the present, but also in the long term. In that sense, the first political party, that is the Mizo Commoners People's Union, this was the first name of Mizo Union, was formed in April 1946, and it was later renamed as the Mizo Union in the same year. So, since its formation, the Mizo Union emerged as a very, very strong political force in the entire Lushai Hills, and the vast majority of people were immediately behind the party. At the dawn of independence, we have the Bordoloi Committee, which was a very important committee to really understand the political aspirations of the tribes, particularly pertaining to the northeastern part of India, and the committee was to give advice and policy suggestions in terms of what kind of political autonomy should be granted to the tribes. Now, the Bordoloi Committee also considered the Mizo Union as the representative body of the Lushai Hills, and in that context, when the committee members visited Lushai Hills, they have met leaders belonging to the Mizo Union, and they also co-opt some of the leaders to be part of the committee. Now, why this is important? Essentially, the context is that by the 1940s onwards, it was clear that the British were going to leave at some point of time, and by 1946, India needs to start thinking about its political future, its constitution. So, therefore, it becomes important that with different kind of political aspirations that is being articulated in the context of the northeastern part of India, the Bordoloi Committee was established and formed to essentially seek representations, also at the same time listen out to different communities, the kind of political aspirations that they have. So, during the colonial rule, the local Mizo chiefs, so in traditional Mizo society, we have there are two strata, one is the chiefs and the other is the commoners, and the chiefs were very, very responsible. The chiefs were highly respected, highly regarded by the community up until the colonial rule. Now, during the colonial period, there was a transformation of the role of the chiefs, in a sense that the chiefs become the eyes and ears of the British, and the perception of the chiefs by the commoners, Mizos, begin to change drastically during the colonial period. So, many a times the role of the chiefs was reduced to collecting taxes. The role of the chiefs was acting on behalf of the colonial state. So, therefore, the relationship between the chiefs and the commoners began to be very, very sour. Now, in the pre-colonial period, the chiefs was the center of the Mizo socio-political life, and the status of the chiefs was highly respected and highly revered. But in the case of, once the Lushai Hills was integrated into the colonial state, the institution of the chiefs underwent significant transformation, and the image of the chiefs itself began to change drastically. So, the local chiefs owed their office to the goodwill of the British, and hence their main obligation were directed to the British administration and not to the welfare of their subjects. And there is a caveat here. One caveat is that when there is any chief which rebel against the British, then many a times their chieftainship was being revoked, or else they were being punished. And secondly, anyone in Mizo society cannot become a chief. But during the colonial period, the British have also granted chief status to many individuals, and who particularly were expressing their absolute loyalty to the colonial state. So, the transformation of the institution of the chief during the colonial state was not entirely of the Mizos, but it was also facilitated by the colonial state. And by the 1940s onwards, so Mizoram being colonized integrated into the colonial state from the late 19th century onwards. So, what we essentially see is that in the last 40 to 50 years, from 1890 to 1940s, there were a section of people who began to be educated. So, this educated class began to demand recognition of their status in the rest of the Mizo society, which inevitably brought them into direct conflict with the Mizo chiefs. So, the people of this new class were Mizo Unionists who were against the chiefs and wanted the abolition of the chief rule. They wanted the abolition of chief rule essentially because the role of the chief was reduced to being the eyes and ears of the colonial state. The role of the chiefs was essentially reduced to mere tax collector. So, even in the pre-colonial society, Mizo chiefs collect taxes. Mizo chiefs, perform a lot of duties and responsibilities, but then it was never, met with any kind of hostility. People were very happy, to pay taxes, but the difference was that chiefs also perform their roles and responsibilities. But after the entry of the colonial state, that role get transformed, by which people see paying of taxes to the chiefs as a huge burden. And this resulted into confrontation between the commoners, particularly led by the new educated class in Mizo society, which was supported by the vast majority of the Mizo commoners. Now, the confrontation between the Mizo chiefs and the commoners began to gain momentum, and which eventually led to the formation of the Mizo Union. Now, to talk about these political shifts that happened from pre-independence period to the post-independence period, the primary goal of the Mizo Union was to establish a democratic governance structure that would replace the hereditary chieftainship system. It aimed at introducing social reforms in Mizo society and was primarily against the tribal chiefs. Now, one of the primary agenda of the Mizo Union was to abolish chief and institute a democratic governance. Therefore, the Mizo Union saw a lot of promise in the independence of India and the establishment of India as a democratic country, because the hope was that if India is a democratic country, people will elect, leaders will be elected. People will no longer live at the mercy of the chiefs. Chieftainship have no place in a democracy. So, therefore, the institution of chieftainship will be abolished, by which the vast majority of people also supported the Mizo Union. So, the Mizo Union was formed with the permission of the British political superintendent in 1946. However, the party soon started gaining support from all sections of the society, and the colonial state saw this as a threat that was coming, and several efforts were being made to actually curtail the growth and progress of the Mizo Union. And one of them was that A.R. Macdonald, who was one of the political superintendent in the 1940s, actually took away all the financial donations from the party, and this was essentially to cripple the Mizo Union by allowing them to organize events or meetings or even to raise funds. Now, for a political party to function without any kind of funds, it is merely impossible, and the A.R. Macdonald actually have tried doing that with the Mizo Union. However, the Mizo Union persisted in mobilizing support despite different kinds of challenges, using public protests, political songs, in Mizo it is known as Party Hla, and grassroots activism to garner widespread backing from Mizo commoners. Now, the commoners being the majority, so the political culture, the democratic political culture was deeply ingrained in the minds of the people. It was Mizo Union which have established this democratic culture among the common people. They have sold the vision of democracy to the vast majority of Mizos, who were actually becoming the backbone of the anti-chieftainship movement as well. The Mizo Union leaders were able to navigate between the dual aspirations effectively. The first being the overthrowing of the chiefs, and second, the demand for autonomy provisions under independent India. By 1946, the contest and confrontation between the British, the chiefs and the Mizo commoners, led by the MU, dominated the political scene in Mizoram. So, from the 46 onwards till the 50s, what we see is that on the one hand, we have the British and the chiefs standing together, and on the other hand, we have the Mizo Union and their supporters, and this dominated the political scene and determined the political trajectory in the early years of independent India in the context of Mizoram. So, towards this, A.R.H. Macdonald, who tries to sabotage the rise and growth of Mizo Union, convened what he called the district conference to take place on 6 January 1946 as a body to represent the Mizos. So, basically they were trying to undermine the Mizo Union. The Mizo Union opposed to be part of this conference as they objected to the chiefs having equal representations. The MU demanded twice the number of representatives for the commoners. Now, so what MacDonald is trying to actually do is trying to give preferential treatment to the chiefs by granting them equal number of representatives, which the MU definitely oppose it, saying that they should have more numbers, essentially because they are more and they have the support of the commoners. Meanwhile, new developments took place with L. Peters, who replaced MacDonald in 1947, and he continued with the same policy of suppressing the Mizo Union. After India attained independence, the District Advisory Council was constituted and elections were conducted on 23rd March 1948. Now, the Mizo Union, there was no doubt that the Mizo Union was much in favor of when it comes to elections, and it was not a surprise that they sweep 25 seats, which was set for the commoners, and they formed the majority against the chiefs. This implied that the Mizos' consent to be part of the Indian Union, as the Borderline Committee accepted the Mizo Union as the sole representatives of Lusail Hills, and the subcommittee represented the northeastern region in the Constituent Assembly, framing the constitution. So, on one hand, the primary concern of the Mizo through the Mizo Union was sorted out, in a sense that the Mizo Union emerged victorious, and on the other hand, their aspiration for political autonomy was granted because they were considered as the sole representative of Lusail Hills. So, when the constitution came into force, Mizoram was directly put under 6th schedule. The entire state of Mizoram was under 6th schedule that grants them significant autonomy. This triggered public debate among the Mizo leadership, who were divided on this issue. However, the Mizo Union adopted a resolution in support of the merger of Lusail Hills with the Indian Union. So, basically the Mizo Union was a party that was pro-integrationist, and they were essentially integrationists because of their hope of a democratic or a political future which was democratic in nature. So, in 1947, a different political party was formed, which also emerged as the most significant political rival of the Mizo Union and supported by the chiefs. In 1947, the United Mizo Freedom Organization, the Freedom Organization, was formed in reaction to the formation of the Mizo Union, with support of the chieftains to oppose merger with India. The first Lusail Hills District Council government was formed by the Mizo Union. So, like I said, when the constitution came into force, Mizo Union was put under 6th schedule, and it becomes imperative that elections to the council was conducted. It was inaugurated, the first Lusail Hills District Council government was formed by the Mizo Union. So, basically they have defeated the United Mizo Freedom Organization, which was supported by the chieftains, and the first district council was inaugurated on 26 April 1952, and Mr. Lalsoya was elected to take the place as the chief executive member, Lusail Hills District Council, which was later on changed into Mizo District Council, effective from 1942 as per the Lusail Hills District in 1954 enacted by the Indian Parliament. Now, like I said, Lusail Hills, Mizoram, all these are the same. So, over a period of time, the name was changed from Lusail Hills to Mizo Hills and then to Mizoram, a name which is retained even till today. Now, certain members of the Mizo Union expressed their desire to change the chief executive member of Mizo Union. This led to internal debacle and led to the formation of Mizo Union right wing. So, by very early on, there was a division of opinions in terms of who should lead the district council, and this resulted into factionalism within the Mizo Union, resulting into the formation of the Mizo Union right wing. Reshuffling of the CEM, which led to the birth of Mizo Union right wing, apparently impaired the performance of Mizo Union in the 2nd district council election. The Mizo Union right wing contested the election and scattered the vote bank of the party. On 1st October 1957, the Mizo Union right wing and Amphor dissolved their parties and formed the Eastern India Tribal Union Mizoram branch. The main propaganda of this new group was to unite all the hilly political parties in the state of Assam to achieve a separate hill state. So, you see that the political trajectory began to take a different turn, and by the 1950s you will see that the Mizo Union right wing and Amphor, which was a party established by the chieftains or with the support of the chieftains, merged to form the Eastern Tribal Union, and this was the period when Assamese there was an attempt to impose Assamese as the official language of the entire Assam, and by which this Eastern Tribal India Tribal Union clamored for a separate hill state that will not only constitute present day Mizoram, but also several other tribal areas in the northeast. Under these circumstances, the Assamese language bill was passed in 1960. The action of the Assam chief minister was widely criticized by many, and the trust of the hill people was lost. The Mizo Union was also against this introduction or against this passing of the bill and condemned the way in which the Assam government also handled the famine of 1959. Like I said, Mizoram experienced two very significant challenges. One was the famine that because of the bamboo flower in 1959, which resulted in the deaths of hundreds and hundreds of Mizos, and the other was the attempt to impose Assamese as the official language. So, in protest against what was happening, the MLAs from Mizo Hill district submitted their resignation as a sign of protest. However, one of them by the name A. Thanglura was unwilling to resign from his post, so he left the party and formed the Congress party. So, basically we begin to see how the sea of change or sea of political change in Mizoram provided new opportunities for establishment of political parties such as the Congress. So, what can be understood is that political consciousness and political culture in Mizoram did not come from any outside forces. It was something that emerged from within, right? And it was much later on that national political parties such as the Congress also have their presence in Mizoram, and it was only in 1961. A special assembly of the party was held on 10 July 1963 demanding a separate state for the Mizo. At this assembly, more votes were cast in favor of a separate state for the Mizo as opposed to the Hill state policy. It was also proposed that if the Indian government did not meet their demand for statehood before the end of 1964, direct actions would be taken. So, the demand for statehood was growing everywhere. Every tribal communities in the northeast was clamoring for a separate statehood by separating themselves from the dominance of the Assam. So, in that spirit, the Mizo Union was leading the movement for upgrading Lushai Hills or Mizo Hills to a full-fledged state. On 31st August 1963, the Mizo Union submitted a memorandum to the government of India demanding statehood. In December 1964, the Mizo Union councillors had a meeting and decided to withhold taking direct action. The decision of the government of India to convert the Mizo district into a union territory caused difference of opinion among the members of the party. In the MU General Assembly held on 1st December 1971, members were asked to choose either UT or the state by voting. Surprisingly, more members chose union territory. So, Mizoram today, present day Mizoram passed through different stages of political developments. The first is that the district was put under 6th schedule, and in 1971 it was upgraded to a union territory status, and in 1987 it was declared as a full-fledged state. Now, in all this process, it was not only the government of India imposing its decisions, but we also see that it was this formation or this creation of different political structures and political institutions were in response to the kind of political change that was happening in the region. So, during this time, more members of the MU supported the status of UT for the Mizo Hill. There were several factors. Firstly, the pioneer leaders of the MU party did not believe that MNF would win the fight for Mizoram independence. During this period, there was a parallel armed struggle that was happening led by the Mizo National Front. Secondly, the MNU prefers independence from Assam state and attaining the status of UT as soon as possible rather than delaying it and going through the lengthy process of fighting for statehood. So, basically the idea was that it will be far more easy or reasonable to demand union territory because it may take a long time to actually achieve statehood. Thirdly, leaders of the MU felt that it was preferable to be under the direct supervision of the government of India than rather being under the poor and unjust Assam state government. So, basically what happened is that the kind of dissatisfaction and resentment against the actions of the Assamese or Assam government resulted into the belief that it was better, the primary goal was to get out of Assam, whether it was UT or state. But the easy route seems to be that if it is UT, that will be the first step. So, therefore, Mizo Union leaders in some sense were quite pragmatic in their approach, by which they say that for the time being let us settle with union territory and we will see what will happen next. So, by this time Mizo Union was quite not very old political party, but it has seen different phases, and over a period of time also it began to see its decline as well. So, under the Northeastern Reorganization Act 1972, the Mizo district was upgraded to the status of union territory and it was renamed as Mizoram. The first election to the Legislative Assembly was held in 1972. In the elections, the party secured 21 seats, forming the first government of UT of Mizoram under the leadership of Chou Chunga as the CM. Indian National Congress secured 6 seats and independent candidates won 2 seats in the election. During this time, because of the political situation in Mizoram, there was a proposal to merge the Mizo Union with Congress, and this happened in July 1974. And after that, Congress became a strong political force in Mizoram, essentially because of the merger of Mizo Union into the Congress party. So this is the story, of how national political parties like Congress, have a very, very strong hold in today's Mizoram. The Mizo Union Executive Committee and Mizoram Congress Committee decided to form the ad hoc committee on 23rd January 1974 and form government under the Congress party. The MU, which was the first political party in Mizoram, dissolved after 27 years from its establishment. So a political party with a very, very rich and vibrant history was buried in 1974 after 27 years of its existence. The Mizo Union right-wing members joined the People's Conference Party, which was formed on 7 April 1975, and the People's Conference Party became one of the most important rival of the Congress Party, at least for 10 to 15 years. Mizo Union, during the entire course of its existence, played a very, very important role in inculcating a spirit of regional sentiment and socio-political consciousness among the masses and tried to preserve the Mizo ethnic identity. So overall, what we see is that the political history of Mizoram cannot be talked without referring to the role played by the Mizo Union. Mizo Union was not just another political party. It aspired a political status in terms of articulating certain demands, but at the same time, most importantly, what the Mizo Union did was also about creating a democratic culture, a democratic consciousness in the minds of the Mizos. And this is something that continues to be seen in the context of Mizoram, where people have a strong belief in the idea of democracy. So the groundwork for political mobilization, political consciousness was something that was laid down by the Mizo Union, and its leaders were very, very competent leaders, in the sense that they were one of the first educated leaders, and despite that they were capable of getting a lot of support from the vast majority of people who were part of the commoners. The Mizo Union is also important because if one goes back to the history of Mizoram, you will see that they have been quite instrumental, and some of the things that they have done for Mizoram are still very much very much visible today. For instance, the renaming of Lusai Hills to Mizo Hills and then Mizoram, and also the renaming of Lusai officially and to Mizo. So in that sense, the contribution, the role, the kind of political aspirations that Mizo Union have articulated is very important. And since we are only talking about the Mizo Union here, I believe that there are also different political parties which have also played significant role, particularly in the context of tribal studies. And it is important that we really understand the kind of political trajectories, political aspirations that are being articulated by these communities. Thank you so much.